Well, hello there, gamers. It's Professor Meg here, and today we are doing something very exciting. The Tainted Grail RPG is currently on GameFound. The link is down below, but this video is sponsored by Studio Aggie. They are working with the team at Tainted Grail over at Awakened Realms, and they are making an RPG that is fully playable with their own system that is based on their Shadows of Esteren system. And with that, we are going over the board game of Tainted Grail Shadows of Avalon and looking at the differences between that and Tainted Grail Songs of a Dying World. Now, they are very different games. If you know anything about RPGs, they are nothing like board games. However, they do share a lot of similarities. And I think those similarities are what are going to interest you and what ties you from a board game to an RPG. So with that, we are going to take a look into it. Now, one of the strongest ties that we have between the two games is a strong narrative theme. There is so much lore across both of these games. It is almost overwhelming. As you are going through the world of Tainted Grail in the board game, you are uncovering these map tiles and finding out more and more about the world. You're uncovering different narrative story arcs, and there are even dream worlds that you can uncover that have even more things happening in them, not to mention that each of your players have their own individual player sheets where they have these really interesting things that are going on with them. Now, in Tainted Grail Songs of a Dying World, this takes place 100 years after this battle with Avalon. Avalon does unfortunately fall, and after that, 100 years later, this is Songs of a Dying World, when people are finally journeying out and trying to make it in the world again and become Guardians of Avalon. Now, there are a lot more decisions in the RPG. There are a lot more things that you will be able to choose as opposed to specific text that you will go to read. You will be able to develop the story yourselves and immerse yourself in the characters, but overall, this also has a ton of lore behind it. In fact, the first 100 pages or so are just about what happened in those 100 years. So this RPG does develop so much backstory for the board game that if you are a fan of the content in general, it does go over a lot of what happens in the world and gives you a great backstory and a lot of reading. Now, just to clarify before we get more into the video, everything to this side to my left is from Tainted Grail: The Fall of Avalon. This is the board game from Awakened Realms, and that is everything to this side. Everything that is over to this side is not only Tainted Grail Song of a Dying World, but it is also a prototype. Everything you see here is a prototype, including this book that I have here, which is a soft cover for me, but will be a hard cover when you are able to play with this. So please keep that in mind, that this side is a prototype phase, as well as the miniatures and stuff like that. However, they are really well detailed, and I think they are quite beautiful, but I'm sure they will be even better when you are getting your final copy in person. Now, there are a lot of things to get into when you're comparing a board game to an RPG, but one of the first things is going to be that in a board game, everyone can play. Everyone is just a player, and the board game will run itself. There are a lot of pros and cons to that. One of the cons is that it does stop creativity, where you are not able to weave a web of the story because no one's able to actually run it, but you are able to all play with your friends, and if you don't have anyone that feels comfortable running a game, it does do a lot of that heavy lifting for you, especially if you want to get them into the world of this before you jump into something like the RPG. Now, the RPG does need a leader to be running the game, so someone does have to be running everything that is going on, but as I said, that does allow for a lot more creativity and things to happen that the players are choosing to do and developing their characters. Not only that, but the progression system is different, so we'll talk about that. In Song of a Dying World, players will progress in a few different ways. They are able to gain experience. You'll get experience points based on the different scenarios that you encounter. So depending on what you encounter and how you tackle it, if you do it in a very exceptional way, you may get more experience, or if you do it in a very poor way, or maybe if you flee and don't really do anything, you may get less experience. That's all to the leader's discretion on how well you performed in that certain thing. However, there is a specific suggested bracket on what you should do and how much you should be gaining. Now, on top of that, if you pay into what your character wants to be doing, into their call to be a guardian for Avalon, then they will ascend. This is an ascension arc where you ultimately become a guardian. However, you are able to pay into your more human traits instead. And when you do that, you defect from your chosen fate, and you are able to gain disgrace instead, which is very unique to the RPG system, and a lot of that is based around the choices you make. Now, in Tainted Grail, you are able to make quite a few choices, especially with what you're doing and how you are building out your character, but you are progressively gaining different experience points, which you are using to gain different skills and abilities that you'll pay into for your different characters, and that's the only way you will really be advancing your character. Other than that, you will be changing different cards in your decks, so you are definitely advancing, but it is in more of a fixed way where the game has, for example, we have ally set up here, and you are going to go through the ally cards, and you are able to move up her tracks. So as high as her health goes, which is a 7, that is as high as you're able to get, and you're kind of limited to what the characters are able to do, whereas in the RPG, you are able to build out your characters and customize them to exactly what you want them to be. Now, in the board game Tainted Grail, I think that how you explore the map is really unique and very, very fun. There are cards numbered, and as you explore, you pull out the different cards and you are building the map more and more as you progress. So you can see here I have it covered a bit, but as you uncover different cards, you will be moving around the map, finding the different tiles, and then being able to interact with them. Now, some of them have different things, where this one would have a menhir on it. Some of them you're able to do different dream things with those, and you'll be interacting with the different cards, spending your energy with the different abilities that you can do. For example, over here you are able to trade with the townsfolk and pay 1 food to gain 1 wealth. So you'll be moving around, interacting with these cards, making sure that your menhir do not run out of time, and increasing your character as much as possible. Now let's take a look at the combat, because that is one of the biggest differences between the board game and the RPG, as it should be. Now, for the combat in the board game, you will have these combat cards that you will be drawing that have different symbols on them. And to grab one of my combat cards, here is a apparition that you would be fighting, and when you are fighting them, you are trying to match up your cards up against those. So you are able to match the symbols here, and then after that play other cards to be able to match the symbols to trigger the different effects. Now, your enemy will be attacking in between, but whatever ability you have up on the front will also be able to help you as well, such as ignore the enemy attack after that attack. And then discard this after that attack. So you will get stronger and stronger in your different combat abilities, and that is how you'll be fighting throughout the board game. Now, in the RPG, you will be rolling a D10 system instead. You have 4 different stances that you're able to take, so you'll be in a different stance when you're entering into combat, and you will have a standard stance, a defensive stance, an offensive stance, or a movement stance. Now, depending on those, different damages will be dealt, but you will be rolling a handy-dandy D10. Whoop! And when you do so, you will be adding your D10 to your combat, your domain, and your stance, and be using that to determine how much damage you are doing to the enemies. So you can see that this is very different from the board game, where you are rolling dice, and depending on the dice that you roll, you are doing different things to the enemies, and you may have other clever things that you are doing as well. Perhaps you have certain items or certain things within the room that you are able to manipulate to your creative ability, and you're able to stop the enemies in other ways. Maybe you're able to have a conversation with them and talk them out of that instead, which also goes back to Tainted Grail, the board game, because in that you also have your diplomacy cards. Now, when you are going through a diplomacy track, it is similar to your attacking, but you can see here we have a curfew card, and you'll also have cards to play up against those, but you will still be matching the different symbols. So when doing so, you'll match them up and be able to trigger different effects, and you are trying to gain grace with the different people to be able to have the best outcome possible. Now, in other places, like if you were to fail, you would lose energy and resolve certain encounters, so you would be encountering different negative effects if you are not able to do so. Now, the RPG does still have those negative effects. Certain things will be happening to you, and you'll be encountering certain guards being detained, etc., depending on certain bad rolls, but you will still be able to have those diplomacy exchanges, and depending on your abilities and the rolls that you're making for those types of checks, you will be able to see if you're able to talk them into a different resolution instead. In Tainted Grail, the board game, you do have 4 different characters to choose from. They do have their backstories, which are shown here, and their character boards. In the RPG, there are 5 playable characters. There are 4 here, plus the 1 sheet that I have open here for Maeve. So there are 5 playable characters, but also there are character sheets where you are able to develop whatever character you want. You are able to name them anything, give them any occupation, any age, description, origin, and you'll be able to play them from there. Now, another thing that the RPG does is it gives you different colors. Every player is a different color. For example, Maeve here is blue, and even if you're creating your own character, you would have to determine what color they would be. This would determine certain story arcs for your characters and what narrative beats they would be happening on, because only one character can be each color at a time throughout the narrative story arcs. This is going to customize the game to players so that you're having an even more personal experience throughout the game, whereas in the board game you are playing through that character story versus your own story that you're creating. Overall, both games are filled with this rich lore of a gruesome story that happened to Avalon, which is this Celtic-inspired Arthurian legend type world where Avalon fell and it is coming back and you're trying to do everything you can. There are a lot of forces at work against you, but throughout both of these games there is so much rich story to be read that you feel fully immersed in the world and you feel completely like a Guardian of Avalon, and you do feel like you need to be protecting the world around you. A lot of the creatures are really fun and engaging, and they go from the board game over to the RPGs, so a lot of that is very reminiscent, and you'll be seeing things like menhirs and stuff like that. But overall, it will feel like a very different and customized experience playing through the RPG. Depending on your playgroup, I do suggest that you check out both of these games and see what might fit best in your collection. If you're a fan of Tainted Grail, I think that the RPG has so much lore that alone is worth it, but then trying out the RPG and having so many choices and being able to develop the specific character that you've wanted is very, very fun and engaging. And if you're someone who loves RPGs and falls in love with this world, the board game may be a fun thing for you to try out next when you're looking for something, as it might be a great option for a day that your leader isn't able to play or one of your players isn't able to make it to the game. As a reminder, Tainted Grail Song of a Dying World is a 300+ page rulebook, and there are the miniatures that you'll be getting, the pre-generated characters, and the player sheets that you'll be able to create your own characters, plus a DM screen that you will be able to play with, and you can check out their GameFound page to find out even more about what's going on. Thank you to Studio Agate for sponsoring this video, and thank you all for watching. Let me know in the comments below if you prefer a board game or an RPG, and if this has convinced you to finally try an RPG. I've been Professor Meg, and thank you all for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye!